Welcome to the newscast. I'm Daniel Chen. Let's start with the headlines. President Park Geun-hye has laid out policies to boost domestic consumption and exports covering four main sectors: trade, tourism, venture capital, and construction. In line with the Korean government's efforts to boost the economy and encourage spending, and amid sliding exports and the repercussions of the MERS outbreak, the Bank of Korea holds its key interest rate steady. Korea's minimum wage for next year is set at around $5.30 per hour. That's an 8% hike, but it will be not enough to calm the fury of labor unions who demanded a double-digit hike. We'll have the details. The Korean economy has been hit hard both internally and externally in recent months, with slowdowns of the country's exports and domestic demand. So along with the government's soon-to-be implemented stimulus package, measures to boost trade and aid industry, including construction, were announced at a meeting presided over by President Park herself. Our Choi You-sun starts us off.
A number of external factors, such as the weakened Japanese yen and falling oil prices, have cut Korea's export volume in the first half of this year by 5% compared to a year earlier. This, coupled with reduced spending and investment at home due to the MERS outbreak, has prompted the government to devise additional stimulus measures on top of a $20 billion stimulus package that's on the way. At Thursday's Trade and Investment meeting, President Park Geun-hye laid out policies covering various sectors, including trade and construction, to achieve a balance in domestic consumption and exports. While highlighting that Korea has fared relatively well in exports, jumping a spot in the global rankings to 6th, the president said the country's export-driven economy will not be revived without a recovery of trade. The Trade Ministry has pledged to more than double Korea's trade volume from the first half of the year by spending more than $100 billion from the public and private sectors to enhance the competitiveness of major export items and to financially support small to mid-sized exporters. The ministry did not, however, present a specific plan for raising the price competitiveness of Korean products against their Japanese rivals. Shifting gears to the construction industry, President Park said spurring renovation and the reconstruction of aging facilities is expected to encourage businesses to spend more, and the government has pledged to ease regulations in the sector. In venture capital, officials vowed to create an ecosystem where growth and returns are guaranteed. Choi You-sun, Arirang News.
There's a vacuum in the ruling Saenuri Party, of course. We have no one to represent the lawmakers at the National Assembly for them at the moment. The main opposition, NPAD, also on its part has ended its boycott of parliamentary activities and joined the discussions on the government's supplementary budget plan. Our Park Ji-won tells us more.
In its first gathering since the resignation of ruling Saenuri Party floor leader Yoo Seung-min the day before, the party's Supreme Council emphasized the importance of party unity. Speaking at their regular meeting on Thursday morning, the council vowed to establish a better line of communication with the presidential office.
We took this opportunity to achieve stronger party unity and pursue politics for the public. We will prioritize the economy and the livelihoods of the people through better communication among the party, the government, and the presidential office.
The party plans to select its new floor leader next Tuesday at a general meeting of its lawmakers. The Supreme Council said the party might use consensus to make the decision rather than a vote in order to avoid further conflict between factions. Meanwhile, the first full assembly of the July extraordinary session began with a budget speech from the president on Thursday, in which she called on the parliament to cooperate in passing a supplementary budget bill for approximately $10.4 billion. The budget message was read by Prime Minister Hwang Kyo-won.
This supplementary budget plan includes items needed to overcome the instability and difficulty that have arisen due to the MERS outbreak and the current drought. Once the plan is confirmed, the government will swiftly implement the budget to help stabilize the economy.
The main opposition party, however, criticized the plan and presented their own, which cuts the $10.4 billion proposal to $5.5 billion.
We can't agree with the plan to inject nearly $5 billion that aims to make up for a tax revenue deficit, without any plans to revamp spending or raise corporate taxes. Our party will cut items not related to the MERS outbreak, the drought, or the livelihoods of the people.
The ruling party and the government hope to pass the plan by the 20th of the month. But due to the vacancy in the floor leadership of the ruling party and the determined objections from the opposition party, it's not clear whether they will be able to achieve their goal. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Korea's central bank slashed the country's growth forecast but decided to hold its key interest rate for another month. For this report, we turn to our Shin Se-min.
The Bank of Korea says the country's economy will grow 2.8% this year, down 0.3 percentage points from its previous projection and the government's target rate. The revision comes after the government recently injected $19.6 billion into the economy. BOK Governor Lee Ju-yeol said the central bank estimates the country's second quarter GDP will have grown just 0.4% on year, hovering below its previous estimate of 1%.
The unexpected MERS outbreak and the current drought crisis, on top of slowing exports, contributed to the downward revision. But we expect a gradual pickup from the third quarter, rebounding to the 3% next year.
The central banker added that the uncertainties in global economic conditions, including the crisis in Greece and the Chinese stock market drop, were also contributing factors for this month's revised growth forecast. Since April, the central bank has dropped the first digit on the growth forecast from the 4% range. Experts say that the government stimulus package is not enough to support growth.
The government's extra spending does no good in boosting the country's GDP forecast, as economic conditions before the MERS outbreak show little to no sign of improvement.
But others say that the spread of the MERS virus is just a minor addition to a larger issue hampering growth. Experts are voicing the importance of the government's drive for structural reforms as the country's fiscal and monetary policies don't seem to be enough to counter uncertainties lingering at home and abroad. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Korea's minimum wage for next year has been set, but the spat isn't quite over yet, unfortunately, as the government management still face strong opposition from unions that are planning to strike against that decision. Our Han Da-eun has more.
Korea's minimum wage for next year has been set at 6,031 per hour, up 8.1% from this year. That's about $5.30. When calculated into a monthly wage, given an employee works 209 hours, it's roughly $1,100. The Minimum Wage Council of Korea approved the wage hike during Wednesday's meeting, the 12th of its kind, despite the notable absence of the labor unions. It was supposed to be a full 27-member meeting, but all 9 labor union members didn't show up in opposition. The unions representing the country's workers said they will formally object to the decision and go on a general strike next Wednesday. They initially demanded an almost 80% raise from this year.
We expected at least a double-digit raise. 6,031 is way too low for workers struggling to make ends meet or to resolve Korea's worsening income polarization.
The Korea Employers Federation, on the other hand, says a big jump could expose small and mid-sized firms to greater risk as uncertainties from the MERS outbreak and the Greek debt crisis linger. They added that those firms will now have to bear the burden of an extra $2 billion in labor costs. Korea's minimum wage was increased by 2.7% in 2010 and 5.1% the following year, and by 7.1% in 2015. It stood at about 4,101 in 2010, 4,301 in 2011, and 5,601 in 2015. The Minister of Employment and Labor will officially fix and notify the approved minimum wage by August 5th, after a 20-day objection period ends. Han Da-eun, Arirang News.
South Korea's Foreign Minister Yun Byungse says there is little need for concern about Japan's recent backpedaling on its admission that it forced Koreans into hard labor at industrial facilities that recently gained UNESCO World Heritage status. That's because Japan has to submit a progress report to UNESCO or risk losing its World Heritage status. For details, let's turn to our Kim Hyun-bin.
Korea's Foreign Minister Yun Byungse has called on Japan to take sincere steps to fulfill international expectations and enhance bilateral ties between Seoul and Tokyo. The The statement made Thursday at a forum at the Korea Press Center in Seoul comes after Japan failed to fully accept South Korea's demand to acknowledge that Koreans were forced to work at 7 sites recently granted UNESCO World Heritage status. He said the English version of the statement has been officially adopted by the World Heritage Committee, and Japan should follow through on the promise it made to the UN body. Yun also said there is no need to make predictions about what Japan will do, as it must follow up on the matter by submitting a progress report by the end of 2017, which will be reviewed by the World Heritage Committee the following year. And if Japan's progress is deemed unsatisfactory, the sites could be removed from the UNESCO list. At the forum, hosted by Korean journalists, Yun also discussed North Korea. He noted North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has executed more than 70 officials in his first 3.5 years in power, which is 7 times more than his father, Kim Jong-il. This indicates that the current North Korean leader is still struggling to maintain his grip on power. Yun added that North Koreans appear to have become increasingly fearful of Kim's so-called reign of terror, with some seeking to defect to South Korea. The minister said President Park Geun-hye and her U.S. counterpart Barack Obama are expected to reach an important deal on ways to deal with the communist regime when they meet in Washington later this year. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
The Inter-Korean Kaesong industrial complex has been pumping out goods worth more dollars this year from 2014. Quite a surprise considering the tension and the ongoing wage row there. Our Connie Kim has this report.
Production at the Inter-Korean Kaesong industrial complex, the last functioning symbol of inter-Korean cooperation, has risen despite the wage row that heightened tensions between the two Koreas. Seoul's Unification Ministry said Thursday that $186 million worth of goods were produced at the industrial park from January to April this year, jumping about 25% from the previous year. The figure also rose about 20% in both March and April, when tensions between the two Koreas were high, after Pyongyang's unilateral demand for a 5% wage hike in February. Until the two Koreas came to a tentative agreement in May on the current wage level, there had been some concern about a slowdown in production over the possibility the wage tussle would make the North Koreans in the complex reluctant to work. But experts say that wasn't the case.
The North Koreans working at the complex are very skilled. Instead of being swayed away by external factors, the laborers have been focusing on improving productivity, as their wages depend on how much they produce.
The Council of South Korean Firms operating in Kaesong also says that with North Korea having previously agreed to cooperate on improving production at the park, the wage row has not affected manufacturing volume. The Kaesong complex, which began operating in 2004, logged a total production value of $15 million in the following year. Less than a decade later, the figure had jumped to $470 million. Production at the joint Inter-Korean Kaesong factory zone accounted for 99% of inter-Korean trade last year. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Debt-ridden Greece has formally requested a 3-year aid package from its creditors in return for renewed promises of economic reform. And now, the Greek Prime Minister-elect Tsipras told the European Parliament in Strasbourg that concrete and credible proposals will be delivered to Brussels before the week is out and ahead of an emergency EU summit there on Sunday. Tsipras said his country had been turned into an austerity lab over the past 5 years, but the experiment had failed. Delivering an ultimatum after Greece's series of broken reform promises, European Council President Donald Tusk said there will be no more deadlines after this week. Lumping more misery on the Greek people, the nation's state television has reported that Greek banks will stay shut for the rest of the week, with a €60 per day withdrawal limit at ATMs also remaining in place. And although they were originally scheduled to reopen on Wednesday. And on top of the deepening crisis in Greece, China's tumbling financial markets are adding to uncertainties here in Korea, with many saying the situation in China is actually the larger global economic concern. With the Shanghai Composite Index falling nearly 6% Wednesday from the day before and by around 30% in the span of just 3 weeks, the impact is becoming more pronounced in Korea. The benchmark Kospi dropped below the psychologically important 2,000 mark within the first 15 minutes of trading on Thursday. It's the first time the Kospi has gone sub 2,000 since March. According to researcher Market, Chinese credit default swaps jumped to a 22-month high on Wednesday, which had the knock-on effect of sending Korea's CDS premium to a 5-month high. The index shows the nation's risk of defaulting on bonds it has issued. Arirang TV will launch a 24-hour news channel at the United Nations headquarters in New York. Our Kwon So-hwa has this report.
Arirang TV is just a step away from expanding its broadcasting service into another realm. Beginning next week, it'll be the first Korean UN in-house network channel. On Wednesday, a congratulatory event was held at Arirang Tower in Seoul ahead of the official launch.
Without the United Nations, it would have been difficult for South Korea to become independent. As this year marks the 70th anniversary of the UN's founding, it's very meaningful for Arirang TV to become part of its network, representing Korea.
The broadcaster will join around 20 other news channels, including CNN International, BBC World, Al Jazeera, and NHK, and be viewed on screens at the UN headquarters. In this way, Arirang TV will be able to more actively inform UN employees, diplomats, and the international community about Korea's history, foreign policies, inter-Korean issues, and more. The Arirang TV UN channel will differentiate its programming from the existing Arirang TV world, putting greater focus on news and current affairs. A special launching program will kick off on July 14th at 10 a.m. in New York or 11 p.m. in Seoul. Kwon So-hwa, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of our newscast. Thank you so much for watching. Do join us at 10 p.m. Korea time for more.